Okay, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It is 5:37, and Jen, could you please call roll?
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Bullock? Mr. Smith?
Here.
Miss French?
Here.
Miss Lomas? Miss Weber?
Here.
Mr. Casebeer?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'd like to take a look at our minutes from the April 20th meeting. Is there any suggestions or edits on those?
Madam Chair, I would move we accept the draft minutes of the April meeting as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. And we're going to move on to any agenda adjustments. Cameron? Oh, sorry. Is there, approval of those? Can we say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any objections? Okay, the minutes have been approved. We're going to move on. Is there any adjustments to the agenda, Cameron?
No.
We'd like to open it up now for any public comment. Anyone out there? Penny?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would just like to say as an individual that I think that today is an exceptional day to have a birthday. And if that applies to anyone in the building today, I wish them happy birthday.
Okay. We will then be moving on. Is there any communications from committee members or staff?
Yeah, that's Cameron and I were both at the Lower Mission Creek Design Committee review meeting. The outcome is a little bit in question as to where we ended up. They reviewed a number of the design decisions that have been made to date, and there was a proposal put on the table to dissolve the design committee and to perhaps move that towards the ABR, since they're associated with design issues. And there seems to be a little bit of a difference of opinion of where we landed with that. I think our recommendation, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, Cameron, was that that the decision process is really valuable to have all the parties who have a stake in the decisions in the room at the same time, both bridge designers as well as creek preservationists, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers. It's important that we all understand each other's issues to find good resolution, and that we could use perhaps the ABR's regular or an extended meeting to accomplish that. And so we're hoping to continue to have a forum in which all the constituents can meet on those issues simultaneously, as opposed to one-on-one discussions going forward. Is that fair?
Any other communications? Okay, I'd like to move on to our first business item, which is an update of our stormwater management program from Autumn Malanka.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, thanks, sorry. Again, my name's Autumn Malanka. I've been with the Creeks Division for about 5 years now, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting a lot of you, so I'm happy to be here before you this evening. It's been almost 1 year since my last stormwater management program update last June, and that's what I'm here to do this evening, give you all a little status update on our stormwater management program. Oops. Starting with ending the slideshow. Isn't it normally this one?
Click on the stormwater management.
Oh, see, I'm just trying to use my clicker. Okay. Okay, the stormwater management program. I thought I'd give a little more background than I did last year because we do have some new committee members. So I wanted to just start with a real basic description of what the stormwater management program is. Basically, it meets federal regulations. That's why we have to do it. Specifically, those federal regulations are referred to as the NPDES regulations, which stand for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It's quite a mouthful, but basically that means to protect surface water quality. Stemmed originally from the Clean Water Act. These federal regulations therefore trickle down to satisfy the California State Stormwater Discharge Permit requirements. That's what the Stormwater Management Program, or SWMP, which I'll refer to it from now on, does. And all cities are required to implement a SWMP. All cities that have storm drains, basically. And the SWMP is approved by the State Water Board. So our SWMP is implemented by all city staff. It's not just a Creeks Division program. The Creeks Division provides overall coordination, implementation, and administration. But in general, Creeks staff coordinates with all the other city staff to make sure that we're adhering to the program. It has greatly evolved over the past 6 years. Since 2003, the city was actually informally implementing the stormwater management program as the Water Board reviewed several iterations of the program, and it was finally approved by the Water Board in January 2009. So the intent of this program is really to reduce the discharge of pollutants and protect and improve water quality. So it's really right up the alley of the Creeks Division, which is why I think we ultimately ended up with the administration of this. But normally in other cities it is administered by public works departments or community development departments. The framework and methods within a stormwater management program is basically addressing 6 minimum control measures that I will define in the next slide. Those were selected by the State Water Board, and they really focus the document into 6 major categories. These minimum control measures, or we call them MCMs, implement best management practices, BMPs, lots of acronyms. And these BMPs comply with measurable goals. So there's measurable goals that's set for each BMP, and we basically look at the goals at the end of every year and say, how are we doing? Are we meeting our stormwater management objectives? So we have to comply with these measurable goals as part of our program and as part of adhering to our discharge permit. The SWMP is updated every 5 years. So the Water Board will be intensely looking at it again by 2013. That'll be year 5. And our second annual report was submitted to the Water Board in April 2011. So we've implemented year 1 and year 2, which was 2009 and 2010. Submitted the report for year 2 in April 2011, but technically we're in year 3, being in year 2011 now. So here are the minimum control measures, which basically defines our stormwater management program. The first 2 chapters, or MCMs, within the SWMP are public education and outreach and public involvement and participation. And those 2 are largely focused for the Creeks Division. We implement the majority, if not all, of those programs for the SWMP. The third control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination. That's basically being able to identify where there's illegal or illicit discharges to the storm drain, polluted discharges specifically. Construction site stormwater runoff control is the 4th control measure, and that's largely implemented by the city's building department, and that's managing erosion and sediment runoff from construction projects. The 5th control measure is post-construction stormwater management, which basically means how a project is designed post-construction to manage stormwater on site. So what best management practices or low-impact designs are implemented into a project to demonstrate that stormwater management has been considered. And the last, sixth control measure within the SWMP is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. And that really focuses on municipal operations, how we run our day-to-day jobs, how we manage our trash, our wash water, our construction work, our wastewater lines, our water distribution lines, making sure that all those things keep in mind that we can't let polluted water run off into our creeks and ocean. So the best management practices are the next tier within these minimum control measures. There's over 150 best management practices in the city's SWMP, so it's quite a large program. 45 of those management practices are solely the responsibility of the Creeks Division. Those have to do with the first two control measures that I talked about, public education and public involvement. There's another 15 management practices that the Creeks Division is also responsible for, along with a few other departments like community development and a few others. And then a large bulk of the management practices are the sole responsibility of waterfront, airport, the Parks and Recreation Department, Public Works, community development / planning, and fire departments. So I wanted to list those out just to kind of reiterate that this is a citywide program. A lot of other departments and divisions are very involved and responsible for best management practices. So tonight I really wanted to highlight what we've just recently reported to the Water Board about how year 2 went for the city in implementing our stormwater management program. By creating an annual report, we coordinate and compile quarterly reporting that we require from 13 different departments and divisions. So that's something that I'm collecting from a lot of different managers and supervisors within these 13 departments and divisions every 3 months, making sure that we're keeping up on our required management practices. And by doing that, we're basically summarizing that we're implementing the measurable goals, where we may be falling short, where we're doing really well, how things are working. This year we actually streamlined the annual report a little bit. All the attachments that we actually included in year 1 were removed. This was actually per the Water Board's request. I had put in a bunch of backup documentation showing, you know, we've done our trainings, here's all the sign-in sheets, we have all these different backup information that proves that we're doing the best management practices we claim to be doing. And Water Board staff said, no, this is way too much to weed through. Just summarize your accomplishments. So year 2 annual report, if you ever do take a look at it, it's about a third the size of year 1. The last part of the annual report that's definitely notable is the last section of that, and that's the program effectiveness assessment, which is a fairly new requirement that has been created by another state agency, and basically it assesses the effectiveness of the program, if you want to just read that backwards. So let's go through the control measures and how we did in year 2. Public education and outreach basically educates the public about runoff impacts and methods to reduce stormwater pollution. The highlights that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention this evening is one BMP within there says, okay, we have to present 132 presentations to the youth in our community, and within those presentations we need to reach a minimum of 3,000 youth. And we're happy to say that we almost doubled those requirements in coordination with other outreach groups and educational groups. The city actually accomplished 246 presentations, reaching over close to 6,000 students, 5,700 students. So that's a good thing. We're getting to the youth, which I think is one of the main places we need to be focusing about water quality. Another neat thing was that we actually produced a brochure about parking lot maintenance BMPs. This was a requirement within the SWMP. It was another BMP that said that we needed to do this based on the fact that the city of Santa Barbara has a lot of fairly large parking lots. The criteria for this was any parking lot that has 25 or more spaces, or approximately 5,000 square feet. So that ends up being about 400 parking lots. And I went ahead and brought the brochures if anyone wants to take a look. They came out pretty nice. Colorful trifold brochures, and those were sent out to all 400 parking lot owners, and within the next few years, we'll actually be following up on how they're doing, if they're actually maintaining the parking lots in the way that they should be. Public involvement, the other big Creeks Division focus this past year, it really fosters active community support for protecting water quality. So this is where we try to get people to do hands-on activities with the city. Some of the highlights is this, Creeks Advisory Committee meetings. This is something that's a public forum, and it helps to get the word out that there's people in the community concerned about surface water quality. Intergovernmental meetings is another thing that's required in this control measure. The city participates in quarterly meetings with all the other Central Coast municipality managers or people who run the stormwater management programs, and we share information on how we're doing, what our outreach programs are. We get ideas from one another. It's quite beneficial. Stakeholder meetings, that's another big one. The annual Community Water Quality Forum is another thing the Creeks Division heads up. This past year was the K9 scent tracking that Jill Murray headed up, and this is quite successful. Volunteer projects is another big public involvement approach. The third control measure, detecting illicit discharges. This really works to identify and eliminate sources of, I'll just say, polluted discharges and illegal dumping. There's an enforcement program that the Creeks Division implements every year, and this has been beefed up, especially over the past several years. We've hired a enforcement person who's here to speak to you this evening full-time, and that's his main focus. Before, it was sort of split up between a couple of different staff and wasn't as much of a focus as it is now. As a result, we're receiving more and more calls every year, which is a good sign. People are getting the memo. People are becoming educated. This past year, in year 2, we had over 200 calls. It was about 30 more calls than we received in year 1, which is great. Another thing I wanted to bring up that has to do with this control measure in our program is that there's a big effort that's being headed up by the State Water Board. It's called the Joint Effort for Hydromodification Control Criteria. Another mouthful, but basically that means that the Water Board is looking to find ways that all the Central Coast communities can come together, thus the joint effort part of the title, and figure out criteria for controlling how we've messed up our hydrology in built-out cities. And that actually would be, the end result would be a benefit to water quality and improving our creeks and ocean water quality. So it's a big effort, and it is going to result in some criteria that the Central Coast communities will have to adhere to. So this is why I have this last bullet under illicit discharge detection, that the stormwater ordinance that the city embarked on this in year 1 and 2 has now been postponed, because this joint effort will be defining some criteria and some specifics about how we're going to actually approach stormwater management in the Water Board's eyes. So the stormwater ordinance is postponed until we actually get that criteria, and the estimated date is somewhere around 2012, so at least another year or so. Construction sites runoff control is, like I said, implemented by the city's building division. And in year 2, 2010, there were 245 city projects inspected and reviewed by the building department's staff for erosion and sediment BMPs. So that just goes to show how many projects are actually moving dirt within the city of Santa Barbara in 1 year. It's a huge effort to manage that. And it's challenging. There were some proposed modifications in year 2 that the building department has proposed to the Water Board. One of them being that the erosion and sediment control ordinance that this SWMP originally held the building department to drafting and eventually approving has been proposed for deletion. They prefer the policy language that has been existing in the city for decades and seems to be working in their opinions. So the erosion sediment control ordinance is something that we're going to see if we actually need to embark on that endeavor. The list of sites for rainy season deadline, that's another thing that the building department has actually beefed up. It's a positive modification in that Now they are specifically listing construction sites or open dirt sites that need to be inspected and approved before the rainy season deadline, which is October 15th, technically. Before it wasn't managed as cohesively. Now it is. There's another new tracking and reporting approach that is requiring all of the building inspectors to actually define their inspections and date them more clearly in the tracking mechanism that's already in place. It's called Tidemark. And therefore they can report to me a lot more specifics than I was getting from them in year one. So that's another good thing. We can answer more specific questions that the Water Board may have about how many inspections we're doing, when they're happening, and how things are being rectified if the site needs to be tightened up. Post-construction stormwater management. So this is basically implementing design requirements to address stormwater runoff from new and redevelopment. So even if a site is just being remodeled or repaved or redone, we have to implement these stormwater requirement designs. In 2010, 82 projects actually implemented post-construction BMPs, which means that 82 out of the many projects that were proposed to the city throughout this last year were required to implement stormwater management designs, and that's 50 more than year one. So really what that's saying is that planning and community development staff is getting a firm grasp on which projects actually trigger stormwater requirements and how are we going to actually implement these designs into the site challenges or the site constraints. That's something that I actually work hand in hand with the community development department staff on making sure that's happening. There's also better tracking via the Tidemark system, which I mentioned before, going on with planning. Now we're actually being able, we can track the specifics about what sort of designs are going into these projects a little better than we were before. And lastly is the pollution prevention good housekeeping, and that ensures that city operations protect stormwater quality. This is something that the Creeks Division staff has to do every year is a staff training. It's another outreach effort basically to all the other departments and divisions within the city. Every year we remind them about what stormwater management is and how we can implement stormwater management in our jobs day to day. Really the main message is that as city staff, we should be leaders of the community, and by doing things the right way, we're setting an example for other people to protect water quality as well. Street sweeping is a big good housekeeping management practice that the city implements. Over 19,000 curb miles were swept in 2010, and that concluded in over 2,200 tons of waste material was collected. That was fairly equal actually to year one, but what we're hoping to see is that these waste loads actually increase due to the new screens that are being installed. We've almost completed installing them on all the catch basin inlets. So the screens stop the trash, the sweepers pick it up. Hopefully this will result in an increase in trash that we are able to collect. So I wanted to touch a little bit more on the program effectiveness assessment. It's really a mode for evaluating our best management practices, and it identifies modifications that might be needed to improve our program. So it's a necessary evil. It's kind of a last and final lid on this program that it's tough because we have so many BMPs to manage and implement and track, but it's important to go back and see how they're doing. It ultimately determines if the overall SWMP is working effectively. Year two concluded that the city's SWMP is actually on track for effectiveness, and this is determined by, there's a rating system, and you rate each BMP on what level of effectiveness you're actually obtaining, whether it's just a education level or whether you're actually seeing changes in the community. So it's pretty interesting how that's assessed. I wanted to just conclude with next steps. The city's now 5 months, this being May, into year 3 of formal SWMP implementation and reporting. Can't believe we're already almost halfway through a third year. The annual report is due in the April following the year of implementation. So April 2012, the year 3 annual report will be due again to the Water Board. It's a very large coordination effort. I've already mentioned that there's 13 departments and divisions, so this is something that's an ongoing big report at the end of every year. But it's been streamlined. We've actually been, like I mentioned before, we're improving our tracking mechanisms through the city's tide mark tracking system. And we've created some templates, so the quarterly reporting by all the managers and supervisors is a lot easier. So hopefully we're figuring out how to make this reporting a little easier. So overall, we're on track to meeting SWMP requirements, and that's the good news. It's an ongoing effort. I wanted to close with any questions.
Thank you, Autumn. Is there any questions from the committee? Leanne?
I have one question on the trash removal after the storm drains are put in place. Is there any distinction between trash and green waste? I mean, we have a lot of deciduous trees in the area, which obviously leave debris in the streets. So I was wondering if there was any indication on percentages, tracking.
Yeah, no. The answer to that is no. It's just weight on what's collected. The only addition to the answer that I wanted to say is that the State Water Board actually considers deciduous litter, tree litter, and even sediment that naturally kind of accumulates in the street as a pollutant. So it's a good thing that that's sort of being picked up and tracked, even though it's natural, the fact that it's falling on a concrete gutter instead of natural earth and breaking down like it would normally creates an unnatural environment. So that's why it's considered designated as a pollutant by the Water Board. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Autumn, for your presentation.
Sure.
I was curious about the removal of trash from actually within the creeks. And does that fit into this program?
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely within the intent of the program. It's not a specific management practice that is tracked by the Stormwater Management Program. It is something that obviously the Creeks Division implements, weekly cleaning of the creeks. But I think that we might speak a little bit more to that tonight in the enforcement presentation, maybe not. Cameron, you have something to add to that?
I would just add, we have a pretty extensive creek and beach cleanup program that, and we do actually break down the types of trash and debris that we're removing through that program.
That's right.
It's weighed, and then it's also cataloged so we can see what kinds of trash, and we can work on outreach efforts to try to prevent certain types of trash that are getting in. So we do pick that up in some locations several times a week. And for example, last year, 2010, we had over 55 tons of trash that we removed from the creeks and beaches.
Would that appear in this report, those kinds of figures and accomplishments?
No, it wasn't included in the Stormwater Management Program as one of the BMPs. It should and could, and actually at the end of every year we have an option to propose modifications and or additions. So why not exemplify that? That's a good note taken.
Awareness, out of
Yes.
sight, out of mind.
It's right. Right.
Lee?
Thank you for a good report. I was wondering, looking ahead to April 2012, what do you think the biggest opportunity for the community is to meet a new goal or best management practice in the year ahead? And conversely, given that this is the third or fourth consecutive year of the Greenspan-Cheney recession, and all public agencies are really pressed for staffing and dollars, what do you think is the biggest challenge that we face maintaining our high level of effort? Because I was really impressed that 2 or 3 of the categories we were 100% over the minimum threshold. But are we going to be able to sustain that in this challenging economic climate?
It's a really good question. I can't think of one specific thing. I think you're absolutely right with the financial restraints that the city's up against these days. I know that a lot of the, for instance, Parks Department does a lot of best management practices that protect water quality, and I know that they've been severely cut and the staffing's been lowered. But I think that what's really exemplary of the city of Santa Barbara is I can't think of any management practices that are required of us within our stormwater management program that are being dropped or not, or are being ignored. I think that it's status quo, business as usual as far as protecting stormwater quality. I think it's advantageous that the Creeks Division is sort of administering the program because of our water quality focus.
Thank you, Autumn. We'd like to open it up now to public comment, and we do have one speaker. Penny, if you'd like to step forward and be sure to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shorter. Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Penny Owens. I'm the education coordinator for Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, and Kira couldn't be here tonight to deliver these comments, so they're from Channel Keepers. First, I'd like to applaud the city and their efforts and successes in implementing the BMPs and meeting or exceeding most of the measurable goals laid out in the stormwater management plan. The city of Santa Barbara has been extremely proactive and ambitious in its efforts to address pollution runoff, and for that we are most appreciative. Channel Keeper understands that the city's participation in the Regional Water Board joint effort for hydromodification control criteria is time and resource intensive, and we are glad that the city is participating in that effort. However, we are concerned about the delay in developing and implementing a stormwater ordinance. We believe that the high number of enforcement calls points to the need for such an ordinance. We are similarly concerned about the proposal not to adopt an erosion and sediment control ordinance at all. Clear and targeted ordinances are the most direct and effective means of making the rules known to potential dischargers and ensuring compliance with necessary pollution control measures, and they are strongly suggested by the Regional Control Board and the Municipal Stormwater Permit. Channel Keeper urges the city to move forward as quickly as possible in developing and implementing stormwater and erosion control ordinances. Thanks again for your attention and for all the city's hard work to reduce stormwater pollution.
Ms. Penny.
Question for the speaker, Madam Chair. Thank you for that letter on behalf of Channel Keeper. Because of a pressing schedule, our City Council liaison, Michael Self, was not able to be here to receive Mrs. Malanka's report, although she has received it in written form at her office. And I was wondering whether Channel Keeper has relayed a copy of the letter that you just wrote directly to Councilwoman Self, so that on our behalf, if she chooses, she can bring this before the City Ordinance Committee and try to get it teed up for future public discussion.
That's a great recommendation. We'll definitely send an email to Councilmember Self.
Yeah, thank you.
The comments. Thanks.
Is there any further comments from the committee or discussion?
I'd just like to clarify one thing regarding the stormwater ordinance and the reason for the delay. The stormwater management program is essentially the city's permit to discharge from the city's storm drain system into the creeks and the ocean. And all of the water, whether it runs off of public property or private properties, that goes into the storm drain becomes the city's responsibility. So we are strictly regulated on any contaminants that get into that water, and the city, as an entity, is potentially liable for any pollution that comes out of there. So we're obviously very concerned about it. The fines are incredibly steep, $37,000 per day. Each day is a new violation. And so you can see those numbers accumulate quickly. We're very concerned about pollutants getting into the storm drain. The reason that the ordinance was delayed is after our permit was approved, but before we were directed to develop the stormwater ordinance, the Regional Water Board of the region that we are in decided to go forward with the development of these hydromodification control criteria. They're basically new standards for runoff, and they're going to be new regulatory standards for contaminated runoff. That process is supposed to be finished in 2012. We thought that it would not be a good use of our staff time and resources to go through what is a very lengthy public process to develop an ordinance with all the various city departments and then public meetings at the ordinance committee and ultimate adoption by the city council, where we would be putting in standards that would probably need to be changed just 1 year from now. And so we met with the water board and we talked to them about that issue. We thought it would create not only we'd use up a lot of city resources to do that, but then it would create confusion with the public where every year we're developing a new ordinance. And so the water board agreed with that, and so we have a new timetable for developing the ordinance that will go into place after the water board finishes its process of developing the standards. And secondly, we are going to hear a report on the number of enforcement calls, and the number of enforcement calls has gone up. But what that indicates is we do have ordinances in the municipal code on the books right now to deal with contaminated runoff that's coming off of various properties. And so I just wanted to clarify, we're not abandoning that process. We just felt like that was the best way to proceed through it. Okay.
I appreciate the explanation, and I think Mrs. Malanka touched on that, but I wanted to give something tangible for Mrs. Owens to take back to her board and staff. And there's also the concern that since state budget and staffing cutbacks are even more pronounced than they are on the municipal and county level, there's the possibility after the May budget revise, if they're not able to reach agreement or extend current tax supports, that the state process where they've outlined an ambitious timetable might itself begin to slide. So I think it is great on a staff-to-staff basis that we're on the same wavelength, but I think Channel Keeper's point that the community and all our elected officials have to keep watching it to make sure that we don't backslide inadvertently is well worth taking.
Does the Creeks Division manage and oversee the channels and facilities that collect and transport the wastewater runoff?
No. The city has a wastewater division within the Public Works Department that manages all of the collections facilities as well as the treatment plant.
And that includes stormwater runoff?
No, the storm drain system is actually managed by a different division within Public Works. The Streets Division manages the storm drain system, and so a lot of the design work for that is done within Public Works Engineering. Streets Division maintains and operates that system. We just administer the permit for the discharge from that.
Thank you. This may seem like a little bit of a silly, naive question, but it seems to me with that this whole program is measuring against best management practices as opposed to an end result. Is our water cleaner? Are there less pollutants in the discharge? Right? I mean, I think we heard a presentation just a month or two ago about measurement, right, on that. It's curious to me that there isn't a marrying up of the program, NSPDD, alphabet soup, with the results and with targets. At the end of the day, what do we really want to accomplish? Cleaner water, right? And so I was wondering if there's some history on that.
Yeah, I have two comments on that. I think it's a really good point. First off, the effectiveness assessment program is something that the Water Board requires, and it does, to an extent, try to measure if the best management practices that are being implemented are actually attaining the goals. So, like I mentioned, there's sort of a rating system that effectiveness assessment uses, and one of the top scores a management practice can get is this improving water quality? Can you measure it? And there's very few BMPs that can actually reach that because some of them aren't even designed to do that. But we are trying to assess that. Are we reaching that level? That's the first half of my response. And the second half is that one of the very important best management practices, or BMPs, that we have to report on has to do with the water quality monitoring program that the Creeks Division implements. And so there's a quite lengthy summary in every annual report on how we're doing measurement-wise, if we're actually seeing improvements, if there's something that's measurable to actually demonstrate an improvement. And as you know, the monitoring program looks at that in so many different ways. But I think Cameron might have something to add to that. But that's sort of the two approaches that the stormwater management program uses to back check how the city is actually doing with improving water quality. Does that answer your question?
Any further comments? Okay, thank you, Autumn. I think we're going to move on to item 7B, which is an update from Mr. Jim Rubley on our Creeks Division Enforcement Program.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Jim Rumbley. I've been with the Creeks Division since 2009, May of 2009, so a little over 2 years now. And I'm a code enforcement officer. And this presentation may be a review for one of you, but with so many new members on the committee, we thought it would be a good idea to give you an introduction to our enforcement program and give you a status update, give you some stats on our enforcement program. The objective of the enforcement program is to identify and eliminate sources of water pollution to city streets, storm drains, creeks, and the ocean. There are 2 chapters in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code that are relevant to enforcement, Chapter 16 and Chapter 14. Chapter 16 deals with illicit discharges, and the ordinance basically prohibits any type of discharge that isn't clean water. And that's paraphrasing, but basically that's what it is. It has to be clean water if you're going to discharge into the storm drain system. For Chapter 14, it deals with creek obstructions, and these make up about 1 to 2% of the calls that we receive. We don't get them very often, but the types of calls we do get, vegetation, people cutting trees, dumping them in the creek, changing the flow of the creek a little bit. Recently we also got a call for, it was at Oak Park where rocks were placed in the creek and created a little artificial dam in the creek and an obstruction. So these are the types of discharges that are exempt from Chapter 16. These are not considered illicit discharges if they're uncontaminated. Now, a contaminated discharge is a discharge that would create a hazard to public health either through poisoning or through the spread of disease. So if we take street washing, for example, a street washing discharge would not be exempt if they combine that washing with something like bleach. If they were pouring bleach on the sidewalk and then washing that down, that would be a discharge that's not exempt. However, if someone who's just washing off the street, although there's dirt, that's an exempt discharge. And when we get calls for something like that, I'll go out and talk to the person and encourage them to capture the water, but they won't be getting a notice of violation or a warning letter for that. Also, I'll talk about individual residential car washing. There's some confusion that might be a violation in the city, but that's actually allowed. Although, again, when we do get a call for something like that, or I see something like that, I'll talk to the person, encourage them to go to a car wash or capture the water, wash their car on their lawn, divert the water to landscaping, that sort of thing. But it's not a violation if they choose to discharge water from washing their car into the storm drain. One thing I'll mention that you won't see on here, pool discharges. Pool discharges are not exempt. You're not allowed to discharge your pool or spa, jacuzzi into the storm drain system. Pools have chlorine, sometimes copper, and that's not okay to do. It should go in the sewer. You should drain your pool to an inside drain into the sewer, or if you have a big lawn, you could run it over your lawn as long as it doesn't go into the storm drain. So we track all of the calls that we get. When calls come in, we sort them into 4 categories. They come from Creeks Division staff, they come from city staff, residents of the city, and other agency staff. And other agency staff, we include the county, that's the main source there, but also agencies like Channel Keeper, Heal the Ocean would go into that category as well. So far, through 3 quarters of fiscal year 11, 23% have come from Creeks Division staff. That includes me if I'm driving around and I see a violation. That gets lumped into that category. Historically, since we've been tracking these calls since around 2007, we've had 24% come from within the Creeks Division. And for other city staff, so far in fiscal year 11, 30% have come from them, 26% overall. So if you see 50% of all calls pretty much come from city staff, either Creeks Division or other divisions. Residents so far this fiscal year have made up 45% of calls, 42% historically. And other agency staff is down a bit this year, but historically 8% of all calls come from either referrals from the county or other agencies. The best way to report an illicit discharge is to call 897-2688. That's our enforcement line, and it's my direct line. If I'm out in the field, I'll forward that line to my cell phone. So if you call during business hours, you're most likely to get a live person at that line. And our business hours, Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5:30, every other Friday, 8 to 4:30. So although I'm the primary code enforcement officer for the Creek Division, we have 3 other staff that have been trained and can respond to calls. And sometimes we'll get 2 calls at once and we need to deploy 2 people, or when I'm gone, there's always a backup. So if the Creeks Division's open, there's someone to do enforcement. We coordinate enforcement with several divisions within the city and also the county. Environmental services staff, they have code enforcement officers, and they will handle solid waste calls. Wastewater staff, we get calls reporting sewage discharges. We'll get reports of main breaks or illicit discharges from wastewater staff. Building and safety, we mainly coordinate with them for construction discharges. And we'll get calls from them, and if I'm out on a call and I see work going on, I can check to see if they've got a building permit. And if they don't have a building permit, I can refer that to building and safety for enforcement as well. Water supply staff, we get calls from them regarding discharges, but mainly we're referring calls to them when we get calls for an illicit discharge that's usually people irrigating and irrigation runoff. And they have an enforcement staff as well that can handle that. And county project clean water staff, that's our counterpart in the county. They do pretty much the same thing we do, similar thing that we do. And we get calls from them when they've gotten a call that's inside the city and vice versa. So it's our goal to investigate all calls that come in on the